Clara, you're like rotten tea leaves. No matter how much you steep them, they never produce any fragrance. Victoria's sharp voice cut across the grand ballroom where crystal chandeliers sparkled brilliantly, while Clara stood in the basement kitchen in her sweat-soaked blouse, pouring tea into over 100 cups, forced to endure that humiliation. That night, through the crack of her husband Arthur's study door, she heard his cold voice. "I'm going to divorce that provincial woman and sell off the company." Royal gold? Some harmful substances were detected, but it doesn't matter, we'll be gone by then anyway. Clara's hands trembled, and in that moment when 20 years of endurance came crashing down, she realized the tea she had devoted her life to protecting, people's health, was being turned into poison by greedy hands. Clara, you're like rotten tea leaves. No matter how much you steep them, they never produce any fragrance. Mother, please stop. People can hear you. That's exactly why I'm saying it, Arthur. Everyone needs to know how utterly unsuitable this woman is for our family. These words were being exchanged in the grand ballroom of Stirling Manor, illuminated by sparkling crystal chandeliers. But Clara, the subject of these remarks, wasn't in that glamorous space. She was in the basement kitchen, wearing a sweat-soaked blouse, precisely brewing tea into over 100 cups with identical strength. Her hands moved with mechanical precision, and her nose could detect even the subtlest differences in aroma rising from each cup. Today marked Stirling Tea's 100th anniversary celebration. It was a day to commemorate the proud history of a premium black tea brand that had been a royal warrant holder for 50 years and exported to 70 countries worldwide. At this glorious event attended by London's society ladies, business leaders, and the press, the master blender who had actually created all this tea remained trapped in the kitchen with the servants. A bead of sweat dropped from Clara's forehead onto the worktop. She quickly wiped her brow with the back of her hand. She absolutely could not let sweat fall near the teacups. To her, tea wasn't simply a beverage. It was art, science, and above all, a small happiness given to people. Even though she herself was not happy. Upstairs, a string quartet was playing Vivaldi's Spring from the Four Seasons. That elegant melody drifted faintly through the ventilation ducts. Simultaneously, footsteps, laughter, and the cheerful clinking of teacups transmitted through the ceiling. Clara looked up at the ceiling. Up there, her husband Arthur would be dressed in tails, shaking hands with guests. And his mother Victoria would be greeting guests like a queen, wearing her emerald necklace. "Mrs. Bennet, the dessert setup is complete." The head chef spoke carefully. He called Clara Mrs., but the people upstairs didn't address her that way. To them, Clara was simply Arthur's wife, or more accurately, that woman. Clara nodded and placed the last teacup on the tray. Her fingertips had become rough over 20 years of being scalded by hot tea water and worn by the coarse texture of tea leaves. But those hands remained delicate, precise, and above all, honest. Clara looked down at her hands. The tea made by these hands had built Stirling Tea into a century-old prestigious company. But no one acknowledged that fact. Climbing the stairs to the first-floor corridor, Clara paused for a moment to look at the entrance to the grand ballroom. Through the crack in the door, she could see brilliant light and gorgeous dresses. And at the center stood her husband Arthur. He was tall with straight posture, his silver-streaked hair swept back the very image of an English gentleman. Beside him stood a young woman in a red dress. Linda, the marketing director. Clara saw the looks they exchanged. Those weren't professional glances. Her heart sank, but she already knew. Or perhaps she had known for years. But she hadn't wanted to admit it. She didn't want to give up on this marriage, this life. Because she had no other options. Clara. Her mother-in-law Victoria's sharp voice cut across the corridor. Clara flinched and turned her head. Victoria gestured toward her with a hand adorned with jewels. "What are you doing standing there? Since you're out of the kitchen, clear that table over there. We're short on waiters." Clara silently bowed her head and headed to the indicated table. As she collected the used teacups, she could hear the murmuring of ladies at the next table. That person is Arthur's wife? Yes. She's the daughter of a country farmer. You wouldn't believe how much Victoria opposed it. Then why did they allow the marriage? Who knows? Arthur must have been stubborn about it. I suppose he was romantic when he was young. But look how much he regrets it now. Clara wiped down the table, feeling the lady's stares. Her face flushed, but her expression remained unchanged. She had learned over the years how to endure such humiliation. Endure, smile, and focus on her work. That was the only way she survived in this house. When the banquet reached its peak, Arthur took the stage and grabbed the microphone. A spotlight illuminated him, and all eyes focused on him. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for being here today. Arthur's voice overflowed with charisma. Sterling Tea has upheld the tradition of English black tea for 100 years. What is our secret? The highest quality and unchanging taste. Applause erupted. Clara watched the scene from a corner of the ballroom. Her lips twisted bitterly. Highest quality? Unchanging taste? She remembered how Arthur had pressured her for the past 6 months to lower the grade of tea leaves to reduce costs. She had refused, and there had been countless arguments because of it. And today, I have a special announcement to make. Arthur continued. Sterling Tea is preparing innovative changes to move toward the next 100 years. Our soon-to-be-released new product, Royal Gold, will allow you to experience sterling tea quality at a more accessible price point. Clara's face hardened. Royal Gold. She had heard that name. But she hadn't participated in blending that product. What did it mean that she, the master blender, hadn't been involved in new product development? At 11 p.m., after all the guests had left and the mansion had grown quiet, Clara dragged her exhausted body toward the bedroom. But passing through the corridor, she noticed light seeping from Arthur's study. And voices coming from within. She unconsciously stopped and pressed her ear to the door crack. Yes, Linda. Everything is proceeding according to plan. It was Arthur's voice. Once Royal Gold launches, sales will skyrocket. And then we'll sell the company. Negotiations with the American multinational are almost complete. Clara's heart began racing. Sell the company? What about Clara? Linda's voice could be heard. Clara held her breath. Divorce her, obviously. Arthur laughed. I'm done with that provincial woman. I'll give her minimal alimony and start fresh with you. We can start a new business in Paris or New York. But Clara knows the blending recipes. So what? The recipe patents are in the company's name. Besides, Royal Gold doesn't use her recipes. We're mainly using cheap Indonesian tea leaves to cut costs, just matching the flavor. Did it pass safety inspections? A brief silence followed. Then Arthur's voice came low. Some samples showed substances slightly exceeding standards, but it's not a serious problem. We're selling the company anyway, and whatever happens after that isn't our responsibility. Clara froze against the door. Her mind went white. Harmful substances. They were trying to poison people. And in Sterling Tea's name. Her hands began to tremble. Her knees wobbled. But she tried not to make a sound. She carefully backed away and walked down the corridor. Then she climbed the stairs, entered her room, and closed the door. In the darkness, Clara sat on the bed. Her hands were still trembling. 20 years. She had lived in this house, in this marriage, enduring insults and disrespect for 20 years. Why? For love? No, perhaps it was fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of being a failure. But now, what should she truly fear? Divorce? Poverty? Or the fact that the tea she had devoted her life to creating, the tradition she had protected, was being defiled by greedy people? At 4 a.m., Clara still couldn't sleep, staring out the window. London's streetlights glowed hazily in the streets. She made a decision. There was one place to escape to. She still had her father. At 6 a.m., Clara left Stirling Manor carrying only a small suitcase. Taking a taxi to Paddington Station, she never once looked back. London's morning was still shrouded in darkness, and the streets were deserted. When she arrived at the train station, she purchased a ticket to the Cotswolds. The train left London and gradually headed toward the countryside. Through the window, the city's buildings disappeared, and green hills and pastures began to unfold. Clara leaned her forehead against the window and watched the scenery. How long had it been since she'd seen such a view? She hadn't visited her family home once in the past 5 years. No, she couldn't visit. Victoria wouldn't allow it, and Arthur was indifferent. When the train arrived at Moreton in Marsh Station, it was 9 a.m. Clara caught a taxi in front of the station and gave her father's address. The taxi driver nodded and drove. After about 20 minutes along the winding country roads of the Cotswolds, a weathered wooden sign appeared. Miller Herb Farm. Clara's chest tightened. This was where she was born and raised. But it was also the place she had wanted to escape from. Daughter of a poor farmer. That had been her identity, and that had been the basis for the ridicule she had endured throughout her life at the Sterling family. The taxi stopped at the farm entrance. Clara paid the fare and got out. Walking along the gravel path, a small stone building appeared. The house looked more dilapidated than her memory. Ivy climbed up the walls, and several roof tiles were cracked. But the garden was beautiful. Lavender, chamomile, and peppermint were planted in orderly rows, with roses and jasmine releasing their fragrances between them. Clara stood in front of the entrance. Her hand reached toward the doorbell, then hesitated. What should she say? How should she explain? But before she could press the bell, the door opened. Clara. Henry Miller stood in the doorway. He looked older than Clara remembered. His hair had turned completely white, and deep wrinkles were etched into his face. But his eyes remained sharp and intelligent. "I've been waiting." Clara looked at her father in surprise. "How did you know I was coming?" "I can tell by looking at your face." Henry opened the door wide. "Come in. Tea is ready." Clara followed her father into the house. The interior was simple but clean. There was old oak furniture, hand-woven rugs, and a fireplace. The scent of dried herbs subtly filled the air. Henry guided Clara to the living room and gestured for her to sit on the worn sofa. "Sit here. I'll bring the tea." Clara sat on the sofa and looked around the living room. Old photographs hung on the walls. Clara as a child, her late mother, and her father in his youth. Next to them was a bookshelf packed with various books about herbs and tea. Looking at that bookshelf, Clara suddenly realized. Her love for tea had begun right here, from these books, and from her father. Henry returned carrying 2 teacups. He handed one to Clara and sat in the chair opposite. Clara accepted the teacup and smelled the aroma. Her eyes widened. "This is Darjeeling First Flush?" Clara said in surprise. "And the highest grade." "Correct." Henry smiled. "Your favorite tea. Do you remember? When you were 15, how amazed you were when I first brewed this tea for you." Clara took a sip. Complex and delicate flavors spread through her mouth. Floral notes, fruity hints, and a subtle sweetness. It was perfect. Tears welled in her eyes. "Dad." Clara's voice trembled. I failed." "Failed?" Henry set down his teacup and asked. "What did you fail at?" "Everything." Clara's voice cracked. "My marriage, my life, everything. I endured for 20 years. Being ignored, insulted, treated like a servant, I endured it all. I persevered with the pride that the tea I made kept the company alive. But they're trying to poison people. For money." Clara poured out the story she had heard the previous night to her father. Royal gold, cheap tea leaves, harmful substances, the company sale, and even the divorce plan. While she spoke, Henry listened quietly. His expression didn't change, but his gaze grew sharper. "And now I have nothing." Clara finished. "I left empty-handed. I have nowhere to return to, nothing I can do. At over 50, I'm becoming a divorcee. Enough." Henry raised his hand to stop Clara. "Clara, you haven't failed. You didn't fail, they failed to recognize your value. But Dad, I really have nothing. Even the patents for my blending recipes are in the company's name. Do you know what you have? Henry stood up and asked. Your tongue, your nose, your hands, and your honesty. No one can take those away. And Clara, you also have me. Henry walked to the closet and opened the door. Behind it was another door, a safe. Clara looked at her father with surprised eyes. Henry entered the safe's combination. When the door opened, it was filled with documents and ledgers. What is this? Clara asked. What I've been preparing for you for 20 years. Henry said, pulling out a stack of documents. Clara, I'm not a poor farmer. Well, I was poor once. But not anymore. Henry spread the documents on the table. Clara looked at them and felt her breath catch. Bond certificates, property deeds, company share certificates, and most importantly, corporate documents for a company called Miller Holdings. Dad, what is all this? Clara couldn't finish her sentence. After I lost your mother, I had to make a choice. Henry said, looking out the window. Would I die in grief, or would I survive and build the strength to protect our daughter? I chose the latter. Henry began telling Clara his story. How he started with a small herb farm and expanded into organic tea leaf trading. How he secured exclusive contracts with the finest tea plantations in India, Sri Lanka, and China. How he came to control 60% of the global organic tea leaf distribution network. But why didn't you tell me? Clara asked. I wanted to test you. Henry said honestly. I wanted to know if you made tea for money or if you truly loved tea. And Clara, you passed. For 20 years, amidst all temptations and pressures, you kept your principles. Not once did you compromise on quality. Henry picked up a specific document and handed it to Clara. It was a contract with Sterling Tea. Clara's eyes widened as she read it. This is all of Sterling Tea's raw material supply contracts. The total amount of tea leaves I've supplied to Sterling Tea over the past 15 years. Henry said. And this. He pulled out another document. Sterling Tea's debt to me. Arthur wouldn't have known that the Miller Trading he dealt with was my company. How much is it? Clara asked in a trembling voice. About 60% of the company's assets. Henry said matter-of-factly. In other words, I'm Sterling Tea's de facto major shareholder. Arthur needs my consent to sell the company. But he doesn't know that. Clara sank into her chair. Her mind began racing. What did this mean? She wasn't powerless. She had weapons. But Dad, why didn't you use this earlier? Why did you let me suffer for so long? I wanted you to choose for yourself. Henry took Clara's hand. Clara, I could have stepped in and solved the problem. But if I had, you would have lived in my shadow forever. I waited until you could stand on your own. And today, when you left that mansion and came here, it means you're finally ready. Tears streamed down Clara's eyes. But this time, they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of realization. Dad, but I'm still scared. I'm afraid to confront them. Fear is natural, Henry said. But Clara, what should you truly fear? Their mockery? The possibility of failure? No. What you should truly fear is the regret you'll feel when you do nothing. The guilt you'll feel knowing people are drinking harmful tea and you didn't stop it. Clara looked up at her father. Henry's eyes were resolute. Clara, what you need to protect isn't your pride. What you need to protect is the safety of the tea people will drink. And the craftsmanship you've built over a lifetime. That night, Clara fell into a deep sleep for the first time in a long while. In the small attic room of her father's house, under a lavender-scented duvet, she had the first peaceful dream in 20 years. In that dream, she was free, strong, and unafraid. The next morning, Clara woke as a new person. She was no longer a fleeing daughter-in-law. She was a warrior ready to fight back. 2 days later, Clara returned to London. But this time, not to Stirling Manor, but to a small law office in Bloomsbury. It was the lawyer's office Henry had recommended. Entering the three-story building with a sign reading, Emily Watson and Associates, a young female lawyer greeted Clara. "Mrs. Bennett, I received a call from Mr. Henry Miller." Emily Watson was a lawyer in her early 40s with clear eyes. "Please sit. Would you like coffee or tea?" "Tea, please," Clara said. Emily smiled and headed to the tea station in the corner of the office. Clara watched her heat water and measure tea leaves. Not an expert's touch, but care was evident. "All the tea in my office is supplied by Miller Trading," Emily said, handing Clara a teacup. "Mr. Henry is an old friend of my father's. So I've already heard something about this case." Clara accepted the teacup and smelled it. Ceylon tea. The quality was decent, but the steeping time was about 30 seconds too short. But Clara said nothing and took a sip. "Let me summarize your situation." Emily opened her laptop. "Your husband, Mr. Arthur Sterling, is planning to sell the company and simultaneously preparing for divorce from you. And he's trying to launch a product that doesn't meet quality standards. Is that correct?" "Yes," Clara answered. "But is there anything I can do? The blending recipe patents are all in the company's name. I'm just an employee." "No," Emily interrupted Clara. "You're not just an employee. You developed all of Sterling Tea's major products over the past 20 years, and you possess the core asset of blending know-how. Legally, this constitutes trade secrets and intellectual property." Emily pulled out several documents and spread them before Clara. "According to my research, Sterling Tea's employment contract includes a non-compete clause after termination. But this is a double-edged sword. The existence of this clause also means the company acknowledges your value." "What does that mean?" Clara asked. "If the company unjustly terminates you or doesn't properly compensate you for your contributions, you can argue for the contract's nullification. And," Emily paused and looked directly at Clara, "if we utilize the bonds and shares Henry holds, we can demand replacement of the company's management." Clara's heart began racing. "So I can reclaim the company?" "It's possible. But it won't be easy," Emily said honestly. "Arthur's side will fight back strongly too. And above all, court battles take time and money. Are you prepared for that?" Clara was silent for a moment. Her father's words from the previous night echoed in her mind. "What you should truly fear is regret." "I'm prepared," Clara said firmly. That afternoon, Clara worked with Emily to draft a divorce petition. But this wasn't just a divorce petition. It was a declaration of war. 1 week later, Arthur received a document envelope in his office. He casually opened it, then his face turned pale. A divorce petition. And Clara had filed it first. "What is this?" Arthur read through the document. His face grew increasingly rigid. Clara wasn't requesting alimony. Instead, she demanded patent rights for blending recipes registered in her name and royalties for the next 20 years. And she demanded fair compensation for her contributions within the company. "This crazy." Arthur immediately called his lawyer. But even more shocking news awaited. The next day, an official letter arrived at Sterling Tea's board of directors. The sender was Miller Holdings. The content was simple. Request for recovery of outstanding bonds to Sterling Tea and review of management rights. The board erupted. The CFO hurriedly checked the books, and it was discovered that Miller Holdings held bonds equivalent to 60% of the company's assets. "What the hell is this?" Victoria shouted at Arthur. "Who is Miller Holdings?" I don't know either," Arthur said, sweating. "I dealt with a company called Miller Trading, but I've never heard of Miller Holdings." Then the CFO arrived with investigation results. "Chairman, the representative of Miller Holdings is Henry Miller." "Henry Miller?" Victoria frowned. "I've heard that name somewhere." "He's Clara's father," the CFO said quietly. Silence filled the conference room. Arthur's face turned ashen. How could that country bumpkin? Victoria couldn't finish her sentence. That evening, Clara was drinking coffee at a small cafe overlooking the Thames. Actually, she was drinking tea. She had asked the cafe to brew tea leaves she brought herself. Her phone rang. It was Arthur. Clara hesitated for a moment, then answered. Clara. Arthur's voice seemed to be forcing calmness. Let's talk. It's not good to make such decisions alone. I didn't decide alone, Clara said calmly. It's a decision I made after thinking for 20 years. Your father seems to have some misunderstanding. Arthur tried to change the subject. Father has no misunderstanding, Clara interrupted him. You were the one who misunderstood. About me, about my family, and about what I'm capable of. Clara, let's meet and talk. Linda is a misunderstanding, and royal gold isn't as dangerous as you think. The test results. Stop lying. Clara's voice grew cold. I heard everything. In your study, your entire conversation with Linda. Silence flowed from the other end of the phone. I know what you were trying to feed people. How you were trying to sell off Sterling T's 100-year history. And, Clara took a deep breath. What you think of me? Clara, calm down. Let's be rational. I'm being very rational right now. Clara said, contact me through your lawyer. I don't want to talk directly anymore. Clara hung up. Her hands weren't trembling. She had no regrets about what she said and did. The next week, Clara rented a small office in Temple. She began furnishing it as her workshop and office. Books about tea and raw material samples were displayed on the walls. Next to a small sink, precision scales, thermometers, and various blending tools were arranged. When Henry visited the office, Clara was sorting tea leaf samples. You're starting. Henry smiled. Yes. Clara answered. I'm going to make my tea. Honest Tea. A good name. Henry nodded. Honest. Honesty. Clara looked out the window. The Thames sparkled in the sunlight. Somewhere beyond was Sterling T's headquarters. And there, Arthur and Victoria were probably furious. But Clara was no longer afraid of them. She had weapons. Truth, quality, and honesty. Those were her weapons. Dad, this is just the beginning. Clara said. It is. Henry placed his hand on his daughter's shoulder. Now the real war begins. The first blending work in Clara's small office began early in the morning. Before sunrise, she was already sitting at the work table with dozens of tea leaf samples spread out. Spring harvest tea leaves from Darjeeling, India. High mountain tea from Nuwara Eliya, Sri Lanka. White tea from Fujian Province, China. Sencha from Shizuoka, Japan. Each tea leaf had its own unique aroma, taste, and story. Clara placed the first sample in a small porcelain cup and poured hot water. The water temperature was precisely 85 degrees. She watched the clock and waited exactly 3 minutes. Then she took the first sip into her mouth. The aroma spread through her mouth, and her taste buds awakened. A smile spread across her face. It was perfect. But one perfect tea leaf wasn't enough. The art of blending was making different tea leaves harmonize together. Just as each instrument in an orchestra creates one symphony, each tea leaf had to create one perfect taste. For the next several days, Clara repeated hundreds of experiments. She changed the ratios slightly, adjusted temperatures, and varied steeping times. Her notebook filled with dense records. There were many failures. Some combinations were too bitter, some had weak aromas, and others were bland. But after a week, she did it. The perfect blend. It was black tea with harmoniously combined floral and fruity aromas, smooth yet deep in taste. Clara named it, Morning Bloom. It meant the flower of morning. Dad, please taste this. Clara handed a teacup to Henry. Henry accepted the cup and slowly smelled the aroma. Then he took a sip. His eyes widened. This is. Henry set down the teacup and looked at his daughter. Clara, this is better than anything you made at Sterling. Really? Clara's eyes sparkled. Really? Henry nodded. This is art. And this is yours. No one can take it away. That afternoon, Clara gathered courage and began contacting old colleagues. They were craftsmen who had worked together at Sterling Tea. But most had been fired or left on their own during Arthur's restructuring over the past few years. The first person she contacted was Thomas Green. He had been quality control manager until he was fired 3 years ago. Clara dialed his number. "Thomas, it's me. Clara." "Clara?" Thomas's surprised voice came through. "It's been a while. What's going on? Can we meet and talk? I have a proposal." 2 days later, Clara met Thomas at a small tea room. He looked older than Clara remembered. His hair was almost completely gray, and his face showed clear signs of fatigue. "How have you been since you were let go?" Clara asked. "Just getting by." Thomas smiled bitterly. "I've worked as a consultant at a few small companies, but nothing was as rewarding as Sterling Tea. Or more precisely, Sterling Tea when you were there." Clara handed Thomas the morning bloom. Thomas accepted the teacup with a curious expression and drank. His expression changed. "This is, Clara, you made this?" "Yes," Clara answered. "It's the first product of my new brand. Honest. Honest Tea. Honest." Thomas savored the name. "Good. It's what Sterling lost." Clara explained her plan to Thomas. Starting as a small brand, competing solely on quality, and reviving the craftsmanship that Sterling Tea had abandoned. "Will you join me?" Clara asked. Thomas was silent for a moment. Then he said, "What are the terms?" "I can't promise high wages. At first, it'll be minimum wage level. But," Clara looked straight into Thomas's eyes, "we'll make tea you can be proud of. And when we succeed, I'll share company equity with you. That's enough for me." Thomas extended his hand. "Let's do it together." The next week, Clara gathered 5 more old colleagues. A packaging designer, a purchasing manager, and 2 blending assistant technicians. They had all been fired from Sterling Tea or left in disappointment. They joined without hesitation after hearing Clara's proposal. "Can we really do this?" Sarah, the packaging designer, asked cautiously. "Sterling Tea is a huge company. We're only 7 people. Remember David and Goliath?" Clara smiled. "Being small doesn't mean being weak. We have something they don't." "What's that?" Thomas asked. "Honesty," Clara answered. "And passion. We're not doing this for money. We're doing this because we want to make real tea." A month later, Honest's first product was launched. Morning Bloom 50-gram packages, only 500 units. Clara didn't go through large distribution networks. Instead, she personally visited small independent cafes and tea shops in London. The first place she visited was a small tea room called Tea and Sympathy in Covent Garden. The owner was Margaret, a woman in her 60s. She was a veteran who had run the tea room for 40 years. "What tea have you brought?" Margaret asked. "You'll know if you taste it yourself." Clara took out a small sample package and brewed tea on the spot. Margaret accepted the teacup with a somewhat lukewarm expression. She received dozens of tea samples every day, and most were disappointing. But after taking the first sip, Margaret's expression changed. "This is..." She looked into the teacup. "This is real." "Pardon?" Clara asked. "This is real tea," Margaret explained. "Most tea that comes out these days adds artificial flavoring or mixes a little good tea leaf with low-quality ones to deceive people. But this has none of that. It's pure and honest. Because it's honest." Clara smiled. "Honest?" Margaret asked back. "That's my brand name. Honest. Honest Tea." Margaret ordered 50 units on the spot. Clara nearly cried with joy. Over the next 2 months, Honest began spreading by word of mouth. First, it was small tea rooms and cafes. But soon customers began visiting Clara's small office directly. They said, "I've never tasted tea this delicious," and asked, "Where can I buy more?" Clara opened a small online store. And every Tuesday and Thursday, she ran a small pop-up store on the first floor of her office. People began lining up, but with success came crisis. One morning, Clara discovered an internet article. The headline read, former Sterling Tea employee, recipe theft suspicion. The article cited an anonymous tip, claiming Clara was using stolen Sterling Tea blending recipes for her own brand. The article mentioned the possibility of legal issues and raised questions about the safety of honest products. Clara's hands trembled as she read the article. This was clearly Arthur's doing. Since he couldn't attack her legally, he was now attacking her reputation. "Dad, what should I do?" Clara called Henry. "Counter with truth," Henry said. "Lies crumble before truth." Clara held an emergency meeting with lawyer Emily. They devised a response strategy. Clara decided to issue a public statement. The next day, Clara filmed a video in her small office. She stood before the camera and spoke calmly. "I am Clara Bennett, founder of Honest. Recently, several suspicions have been raised about me. I want to use this opportunity to clarify. All of Honest's recipes were independently developed by me. I did not use any of Sterling Tea's recipes. And if I'm lying, feel free to take me to court. But the truth always comes out." The video spread rapidly on social media. And surprisingly, people began supporting Clara. Comments overflowed with, "I believe in Clara, Honest is really delicious. It seems like a big company is bullying a small one." But Arthur didn't back down. The next week, Sterling Tea officially filed a lawsuit against Clara. Charges of trade secret infringement and non-compete clause violation. "Now it's a real war," Thomas said, looking at the lawsuit documents. "It is," Clara answered, "but we won't back down. Because we have the truth." That night, Clara remained alone in the office, looking out the window. London's night streets sparkled with lights. Somewhere, people were drinking her tea. That thought alone gave her strength. "I won't give up," Clara muttered to herself in the darkness. Never. 2 weeks after the lawsuit was filed, Clara faced Arthur for the first time outside the courtroom. It was a brief appearance for a preliminary hearing, but the tension between both sides filled the courthouse corridor. Arthur stood with 3 lawyers in an expensive suit, looking relaxed. Clara, on the other hand, was with just Emily. Their eyes met. Arthur gave Clara a cynical smile. But Clara didn't turn away. She stood looking straight at him. There was no fear in her eyes. "Mrs. Bennett," Arthur's lead lawyer approached. "Shall we talk for a moment? About the possibility of settlement." "Settlement?" Emily raised an eyebrow. "Yes." The lawyer pulled out a document. "Sterling Tea wants a peaceful resolution. If Mrs. Bennett agrees to abandon the Honest brand and not work in the tea industry for the next 5 years, we're willing to drop the lawsuit and pay reasonable compensation." Clara heard the offer and laughed. Reasonable compensation? Did they think they could buy her dreams, passion, and life with money? "I refuse," Clara said firmly. "Mrs. Bennett, think wisely." The lawyer continued. "Court battles are long and difficult. The costs are enormous too. And frankly, it's hard to win. Sterling Tea is a 100-year-old company, and you're—" "I have the truth," Clara interrupted him. "That's enough." The preliminary hearing ended in 30 minutes. The judge set the main trial date for 3 months later. Leaving the courthouse, Emily said to Clara, "3 months. We have time to prepare." But Clara, honestly, it won't be easy to win. Sterling Tea has the employment contract and confidentiality clauses as their basis, and legally they're in an advantageous position. "Then what should we do?" Clara asked. "We need to gather evidence. Evidence that can prove your originality. And," Emily paused, "we need to find Sterling Tea's weaknesses." That night, Clara held an emergency meeting with her old colleagues. They gathered in the small office to discuss strategy. "I think royal gold is the key point," Thomas said. "If we can prove there's a problem with that product." "But how?" Sarah asked. "We don't have samples or insider information." "We can buy it," Clara said. "Royal gold is already on the market. We can buy it and analyze it." The next day, Thomas purchased 6 boxes of royal gold at a department store. Clara spread them on the work table and began opening them one by one. She picked up tea leaves, smelled them, and checked their texture. Her face grew increasingly rigid. This is. Clara placed several tea leaves under a microscope. This doesn't make sense. What? Thomas approached. These tea leaves, the grade is too low. And. Clara picked up another sample. This isn't even tea leaf. They've mixed in leaves from other plants. Are you sure? Thomas asked. I'm sure. I've handled only tea leaves for 20 years. This is definitely not tea leaf. They sent samples to an independent laboratory for detailed analysis. It took 2 weeks to get results. During those 2 weeks, Clara anxiously waited between anxiety and anticipation. When the results arrived, Clara, Thomas, and Emily gathered in the office to open the envelope. Emily read through the report and her mouth fell open. Oh my. Emily looked at Clara. Clara, you were right. This product contains heavy metals exceeding standards. And it includes unauthorized plant components. What can we do with this? Clara asked. We can report it to the Food Safety Agency. Emily answered. And this will be favorable evidence for us in court. While Sterling Tea is attacking you, we can show that they're actually selling dangerous products. Clara hesitated for a moment. Reporting to the Food Safety Agency meant dealing a fatal blow to Sterling Tea. The 100-year-old company could collapse. And there were still people she knew, innocent employees working at that company. Clara? Thomas asked cautiously. Are you okay? No. Clara said honestly. I'm not okay. But. She lifted the royal gold package. This is what people drink. Every day, unknowingly. I can't just leave it. Then. Emily said. Report it. Clara made her decision. People's safety is most important. A week later, the Food Safety Agency began an emergency investigation of Sterling Tea. All royal gold products were recalled, and the media reported this incident extensively. Headlines like, "The Fall of a Premium Tea Brand," and "Sterling Tea, a Stain on 100 Years of History," decorated newspaper front pages. Sterling Tea's stock price plummeted. Arthur held an emergency press conference to apologize, but trust had already collapsed. And a bigger problem erupted. The company sale negotiations fell through. The American multinational company suspended negotiations citing reputational risk. Clara watched the news with mixed feelings. She hadn't wanted revenge. She just wanted to do the right thing. But as a result, Sterling Tea was in serious crisis. Do you regret it? Thomas asked. No. Clara shook her head. I did the right thing. They brought this on themselves. But Arthur and Victoria didn't sit still. They began pressuring Clara even more aggressively. One day, health inspectors appeared in front of Clara's office. They said they received a tip and thoroughly searched the office. Of course, they found no problems, but in the process, Clara's work had to be suspended all day. The next week, Clara's major suppliers began cutting ties one by one. There had been pressure from above. Henry's Miller Holdings guaranteed supply, but packaging and auxiliary material suppliers mostly also dealt with Sterling Tea. They cancelled contracts with Clara, saying they couldn't lose a major customer. This is clearly unfair trade. Emily was furious. We can file charges. There's no time. Clara said. We need packaging materials right now. We have to ship next week. I'll look into it. Thomas volunteered. I'll mobilize all my old connections. That night, Clara remained alone in the office. Everything seemed to be crumbling. Legal pressure, business interference, reputation attacks. Arthur was trying to crush her using every means possible. Clara looked out the window. Raindrops were streaming down the glass. Tears also welled in her eyes. But she didn't let them fall. Instead, she walked to the work table and took out tea leaf samples. She began working on a new blend. As she moved her hands, smelled aromas, and tasted, she realized once again why she did this work. Not for money or honor. She simply wanted to make good tea. Tea that would make people smile after one sip. At 3 a.m., Clara completed a perfect new blend. She named it, Storm Brew. Tea made in the storm. It was strong and bold, yet had a subtle sweetness. Just like herself. I won't give up, Clara muttered to herself in the empty office. Never. Then her phone rang. It was Henry. Clara, were you sleeping? No, Dad. I was working. I thought so. Henry said. Clara, come to the Cotswolds tomorrow. I have something to show you. What is it? It's a secret until you come. But this will be a game changer. Clara was curious, but her father didn't explain further. The next morning, she took the train to the Cotswolds again. The storm had passed, and the sky was clear. When she arrived at Henry's farm, Clara noticed an unfamiliar car parked. An expensive Mercedes. She entered the house curiously. In the living room, a man sat with Henry. He appeared to be in his early 60s, a gentleman in a neat suit. Clara, this is David Chen. Henry introduced. He came from Hong Kong. Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Bennett. David greeted in fluent English. I'm the CEO of the Chen Group, which distributes premium tea in the Asia-Pacific region. Clara looked at her father in surprise. Henry smiled and nodded. Mr. Chen wants to taste your tea. He wants to introduce Honest to the Asian market. Clara's heart began racing rapidly. This was truly a game changer. But at the same time, she was cautious. Offers that were too good always had traps. Why did you choose me? Clara asked directly. David smiled and answered. Mrs. Bennett, I've been in the tea business for 30 years. And I recognize true craftsmen. You're the real deal. That day, Clara presented all of Honest's products to David. David carefully tasted each one and savored the aromas. His face showed clear admiration. Amazing, David said. This isn't just tea. This is art. Thank you, Clara answered. Mrs. Bennett, I have a proposal. David pulled out a draft contract from his briefcase. I want to exclusively distribute Honest to 10 Asian countries. The minimum first-year order is 100,000 units. Clara's breath caught at that number. 100,000 units. That was over 100 times her current production capacity. But Clara stammered. Don't worry. Henry took his daughter's hand. We have the network. We can expand production capacity. Clara read through the contract. The terms were fair, actually favorable to her. David genuinely wanted Honest. But, Clara said, I'm currently in a lawsuit. With Sterling Tea. Won't that be a problem? Actually, the opposite. David smiled. Your story is also a hot topic in Asia. A small craftsman fighting a big corporation. People love such stories. You're already famous, Mrs. Bennett. That night, Clara signed the contract. It wasn't just a business deal. It was a new beginning. And it was also the beginning of a powerful counterattack against Sterling Tea. On the train back from the Cotswolds, Clara looked at the scenery outside the window. The sunset was painting the hills golden. She smiled. The storm wasn't over yet. But now she had weapons. And she was ready. 1 week before the main trial, London was enjoying beautiful early summer weather. But inside Sterling Tea's headquarters conference room, it was as cold as winter. Arthur sat at his desk staring at financial reports. The numbers were dismal. Losses from the Royal Gold recall, stock price plunge, and above all, the collapse of trust. Quarterly sales had decreased 40% compared to the previous year. This is all that woman's fault. Victoria said sharply, entering the conference room. She was still impeccably dressed, but fatigue was evident on her face. We need to completely crush Clara. Winning in court isn't enough. Mother, can we win in court? Arthur asked cautiously. Since Miller Holdings got involved. We have to win. Victoria slammed the desk. The honor of a 100-year family is at stake. We can't lose to that farmer's daughter. But Arthur knew. Their position was getting weaker. Major clients were refusing to renew contracts one by one, under the pretext of reputational risk. And Miller Holdings was pressuring for bond repayment. If they decided to recover the bonds, Sterling Tea would have no choice but to go bankrupt. At the same time, at Clara's expanded workshop, an energetic atmosphere overflowed. At this place, converted from a small warehouse near the Thames into a production facility, 20 employees now worked. Thanks to the contract with David Chen, funds had come in, and Clara boldly decided to invest. The first container will depart for Hong Kong next week. Thomas came in with shipping documents and reported 50,000 units, 25,000 each of Morning Bloom and Storm Brew. Is quality inspection complete? Clara asked. Yes, perfect. Clara, you personally inspected them all. Clara nodded, but her expression remained tense. In 1 week, she would have to stand in court. Emily was doing her best, but she couldn't guarantee the outcome. If they lost, Clara wouldn't be able to work in the tea industry for 5 years, and Honest would have to close. Clara. Henry entered the workshop. Let's talk for a moment. They went into a small office. Henry sat in a chair and looked at his daughter. You're nervous. Yes. Clara answered honestly. Dad, if we lose. We won't lose, Henry said firmly. Clara, I've been moving for the past few weeks. Quietly, but surely. What do you mean? Henry pulled out a thick file from his briefcase. When he opened it, dozens of documents appeared. This is a list of Sterling Tea shareholders. And this. Henry pulled out another document. A statement of Sterling Tea shares I've quietly purchased over the past 2 months. Clara's eyes widened. Dad, this is. I currently hold 34% of Sterling Tea's shares. Henry said. Combined with the bonds, I'm effectively in control of Sterling Tea. Arthur doesn't know. But why are you only telling me now? Timing. Henry explained. Winning in court alone isn't enough. We need complete victory. And that timing is now. What's your plan? Henry smiled and said. A shareholders meeting. Right after the court hearing ends, we'll convene an emergency shareholders meeting. And at that meeting, we'll demand management replacement. Clara held her breath. This wasn't just a legal fight. This was a coup to overturn the entire company. Dad, but if that happens, you'll become CEO. Henry said clearly. The new representative of Sterling Tea. And Honest will be integrated as Sterling Tea's premium line. We'll protect both brands. Clara sank into her chair. CEO. She had never dreamed of such a position. She was just a blender. A tea-making craftsman. But at the same time, she knew. She was the only one who could save Sterling Tea. On the day of the court hearing, reporters camped out in front of the London High Court. This case was already a hot topic throughout England. Headlines like, Tea Queen vs. Prestigious Family Fight, and Daughter-in-Law's Rebellion, decorated newspapers. Clara arrived at the courthouse with Emily. She wore a simple but elegant navy suit, her hair neatly pinned up. Camera flashes went off, but Clara walked in calmly. Inside the courtroom, her eyes met Arthur's. Arthur still had a confident expression, but slight tension was visible around his eyes. Victoria sat in the front row glaring at Clara. All rise, the clerk said. The judge entered. The trial began. Sterling Tea's lawyer first stated their position. Your Honor, this case is a clear example of trade secret infringement. Defendant Clara Bennett worked at Sterling Tea for 20 years, learning the company's core blending recipes and know-how. And after leaving, she illegally used them for her own brand. This clearly violates the confidentiality and non-compete clauses in the employment contract. The lawyer submitted dozens of documents. Employment contracts, confidentiality agreements, and a report analyzing similarities between Honest products and Sterling Tea products. Furthermore, the defendant illegally used the company's customer list, which is company property, and disseminated false information to intentionally damage the company's reputation. Emily stood up. Your Honor, the plaintiff's claims differ from the facts. First, the honest recipes Clara Bennett developed are completely different from Sterling T's. We will submit independent appraisal results. Emily called 3 expert witnesses. They were all authorities in the tea industry, and they testified to comparative analysis results of the 2 products. Honest's Morning Bloom and Sterling T's Royal Morning are completely different blends. The first witness said, "The types of tea leaves used, the ratios, and the blending techniques are all different." Second, Emily continued, "Clara Bennett didn't disseminate false information. She made a legitimate report for public safety. Harmful substances were actually detected in the Royal Gold product, and the Food Safety Agency confirmed this." Emily submitted the Food Safety Agency's official report. The courtroom stirred. Sterling T's lawyer's face hardened. Third, and most importantly, Emily paused and looked around the courtroom. Clara Bennett wasn't just an employee. She was the person who created Sterling T's core assets. Without her, Sterling T couldn't have existed. While never properly compensating or acknowledging such a person, they actually oppressed and exploited her. That's the plaintiff. Emily called Clara to the witness stand. Clara stood up and walked to the witness stand. Her hands weren't trembling. "Mrs. Bennett, how many products did you develop during your 20 years at Sterling T?" Emily asked. 37. Clara answered clearly. "What percentage of company sales do those products account for?" "About 85%. The courtroom stirred again. "During that period, what bonuses or special compensation did you receive?" "None." Clara answered. "My salary was at the level of a general technician." "Why did you decide to leave Sterling T?" Clara took a deep breath. And she looked around the courtroom. Her gaze met Arthur's. "Because I no longer wanted to be an accomplice." Clara said. "Sterling T was trying to sell unsafe products to people. I wanted to stop it. But my voice wasn't heard inside the company. So I had no choice but to leave." Objection. Sterling's lawyer jumped up. "This is an unproven claim. The Food Safety Agency's report has already been submitted." Emily countered. The judge struck the gavel. Objection overruled. Continue. The hearing continued into the afternoon. Both sides engaged in fierce debate. But as time passed, Sterling T's arguments were weakening. The evidence was working in Clara's favor. In the final argument, Emily stood up. "Your Honor, what is the essence of this case? A woman who devoted herself to a company for 20 years was unfairly treated, tried to stop the company from going down the wrong path, and ultimately pioneered her own path. This is not a crime. This is courage. Clara Bennett is innocent." The courtroom grew quiet. The judge reviewed the documents for a moment. "The verdict will be announced in 1 week." The judge said. Court adjourned. Leaving the courtroom, Clara was bombarded with questions from reporters. But she said nothing and got into the car. "What do you think?" Clara asked Emily. "It went well." Emily smiled. "We're going to win, Clara." The week passed slowly. Clara spent time at the workshop, developing new blends, training employees, and preparing shipments. But in a corner of her mind, anxiety always resided. On the day of the verdict, Clara stood in court again. The judge entered, and the courtroom became so quiet you couldn't even hear breathing. "This court renders the following verdict." The judge began reading the document. Defendant Clara Bennett did not infringe on plaintiff Sterling T's trade secrets and did not violate the confidentiality clause. The products the defendant developed are original and distinct from the plaintiff's products. Clara held her breath. Furthermore, this court finds that plaintiff Sterling T did not provide fair compensation to the defendant for 20 years and did not acknowledge the defendant's contributions. Therefore, the plaintiff's claim is dismissed, and the plaintiff shall pay the defendant £500,000 in compensation for emotional damages. The gavel sounded. Tears burst from Clara's eyes in that moment. Emily hugged her. "We won, Clara. We won." Outside the courtroom, reporters cheered. Camera flashes went off, but Clara felt all of it distant. She was just relieved that she had been proven right. Arthur left the courtroom with a pale face. Victoria walked out slowly, leaning on her cane. Their era was ending, but the real war was just beginning. The next day, Miller Holdings sent an official letter to Sterling T. A request to convene an emergency shareholders meeting. There was only one agenda item: management replacement. Sterling T's headquarters conference room was filled with tension. It was the day of the shareholders meeting, and it was a moment when the 100-year-old company could be completely transformed. Shareholders sat on both sides of the room, and Arthur, Victoria, and the board of directors sat at the front. Victoria sat upright in a black suit. Her face still retained arrogance, but the trembling around her eyes couldn't be hidden. Arthur kept flipping through documents, showing signs of anxiety. At exactly 10 a.m., the conference room door opened. Henry Miller entered, leaning on his cane. Clara followed behind him. Clara wore a cream-colored suit with her hair elegantly pinned up. She carried a briefcase in her hand. The conference room stirred. Many were unfamiliar faces to the shareholders. But some recognized Clara. They were people who had seen her since she first joined the company decades ago. Is that Clara Bennett? The person who was in the kitchen for over 20 years? She's the one who won in court. Henry and Clara walked to the empty seats in the center of the conference room. Henry sat slowly and looked around the room. His eyes were sharp and authoritative. Arthur spoke first. Mr. Miller, you know well what this meeting means today. But I want to say first. Sterling T is a 100-year-old family business. Outsiders can't just. Outsider? Henry interrupted Arthur. I'm an outsider? I hold 60% of Sterling T's assets as a bondholder and 34% of shares as the largest shareholder? The conference room grew quiet. Some shareholders held their breath. What? Arthur stammered. Henry pulled out a thick file from his briefcase and threw it on the table. Here's all the evidence. Bond certificates, share purchase statements, and transaction records from the past 15 years. I was Sterling T's largest supplier, largest bondholder, and now the largest shareholder. And my daughter Clara was this company's actual creator. Victoria jumped up. This is outrageous. You people are insulting our family. Family? Henry laughed cynically. Madam, it wasn't my daughter who tarnished the family honor, it was your son. He sacrificed quality, deceived customers, and tried to sell off 100 years of tradition for money. Do you have proof? Victoria asked sharply. We do. Clara stood up and said. Her voice was calm but firm. Cost reduction records from the past 3 years, quality degradation instruction emails, and internal documents for the Royal Gold Project. They're all here. Clara distributed documents to the shareholders. As shareholders read through them, their expressions hardened. Is this true, President Sterling? A shareholder asked. Arthur was speechless. Sweat began forming on his forehead. There's no room for excuses. Henry said, I demand complete management replacement today. I move to dismiss CEO Arthur Sterling and Chairman Victoria Sterling. Wait, Arthur shouted. You can't arbitrarily change management. This is a family company. Not anymore, Henry said. This company now belongs to the shareholders. And the shareholders want the company to go in the right direction. Let's vote. Shareholders looked at each other. A long silence flowed, and one by one, hands began rising. In favor. Another in favor. Eventually, an overwhelming majority voted for management replacement. Victoria sank into her chair. Her face was pale, and her hands were trembling. It was the moment when the pride of a 100-year family crumbled. And I nominate my daughter Clara Bennett as the new CEO, Henry said. The conference room stirred again. Clara stood up and looked at the shareholders. I've been with Sterling T for the past 20 years. Clara said, I love this company more than anyone. And I know this company can rise again. But for that to happen, change is necessary. We must return to quality. We must return to honesty. What can you do? A shareholder asked skeptically. I've already proven it, Clara answered. Honest expanded to 10 Asian countries in 6 months and achieved quarterly sales of £2 million. And this is just the beginning. If we integrate Sterling Tea and Honest, we can leap forward as a global premium brand. Clara turned on the presentation screen. Her prepared business plan appeared. New product lines, market expansion strategies, quality control systems. Everything was concrete and realistic. Shareholders watched the presentation intently. And they began nodding to each other. This was a feasible plan. We'll vote, the chairman said. Those in favor of appointing Clara Bennett as the new CEO? Hands went up. Far more than a majority. Passed. The chairman struck the gavel. Clara Bennett is Sterling Tea's new CEO. Applause erupted. Clara felt surreal in that moment. She had really become CEO. She, who had started in the kitchen 20 years ago, was now the chief executive of this company. Arthur stood up without a word and left the conference room. Victoria stood up slowly, leaning on her cane. She walked toward Clara. Clara looked at her tensely. Victoria stood in front of Clara. The two women faced each other. A long silence flowed. You won. Victoria smiled bitterly. But remember, this position isn't easy. I'll be watching to see if you can really lead this company. Victoria turned and left. Her retreating figure was still dignified, but somehow lonely. Henry placed his hand on Clara's shoulder. Well done, daughter. Dad, can I really do this? You're already doing it. Henry smiled. Then Thomas came to the balcony. Clara, it's time for the photo shoot. With all the employees. Clara nodded and went back inside. Over 200 employees were gathered in the conference room. They were all smiling. Clara stood among them, not as the president but as a member of the team. Camera flashes went off. That moment was recorded forever. 1 month after becoming the new CEO, Clara was spending whirlwind days. Her day began at 5 a.m. The first thing she did was go down to the blending workshop to personally check the quality of the teas to be produced that day. Becoming CEO didn't change her essence. She was still a blender, and her sense of responsibility for tea quality was stronger than anyone's. President, there you are. The quality control team manager entered the workshop. The executive meeting is in 30 minutes. I know. I'll go after checking this. Clara tasted the third sample. Her face frowned. This won't do. The steeping temperature is 2 degrees too high. We need to adjust it again. But President, general consumers won't notice this level of difference. I notice it, Clara said firmly. And our standard is my tongue. Please redo it. In the executive conference room, Clara sat facing the management. Most of them had been there since Arthur's time and didn't fully trust Clara yet. President, here's the second quarter budget. The CFO handed over documents. Overall, a 15% reduction is unavoidable. Especially we need to reduce quality control department personnel. No, Clara said without even looking at the documents. But President, given the financial situation, quality control is our lifeline. Clara looked directly at the CFO. We should actually increase personnel. Instead, reduce the marketing budget. The marketing budget? The marketing director asked in surprise. Then how do we acquire customers? With good products. Clara answered. If we make really good tea, customers will find us on their own. Word of mouth is the most powerful marketing. The conference room grew quiet. Some executives nodded, but some were still skeptical. There's a more important agenda. Clara unfolded new documents. We'll review all product lines. Products that don't meet quality standards will be discontinued immediately. Then sales will, the CFO said. They'll drop in the short term. Clara acknowledged. But they'll recover in the long term. We need to regain trust. And that's only possible with good products. That afternoon, Clara personally toured the production site. She spoke with workers one by one and listened to their opinions. "President, this machine is a bit old," a worker said cautiously. "Sometimes the temperature control isn't accurate. We'll replace it." Clara answered immediately. "Please submit a list of needed equipment." "But the budget." "I'll handle it. You need to work in the best environment to produce the best products." The rumor spread quickly. The new president is different. She listens. She cares. Employee morale began rising little by little. But external challenges continued. One day, Clara received a call from a major department store buyer. "Mrs. Bennett, frankly speaking, Sterling Tea's image has been significantly damaged. Customers don't trust it. I think we need to reduce floor space." Clara took a deep breath. "Please wait 1 month. We'll introduce a new product line." "Decide after seeing that." 1 month? "Yes. I promise. If you're not satisfied, we'll cover the floor space costs." The buyer was silent for a moment. "All right, I'll give you 1 month." After hanging up, Clara called Thomas. "Thomas, we have 1 month. We need to create a new premium line." 1 month? Thomas asked in surprise. "Usually new product development takes 6 months. We don't have 6 months. We have to do it in 1 month." For the next 4 weeks, Clara and her team barely slept. They tried hundreds of blends and went through thousands of tests. Clara stayed in the workshop until late every night. When Henry visited, Clara was still tasting samples. "Clara, I'm worried about your health." Henry said. "I'm fine, Dad. It's almost done. Don't overdo it. You've already proven enough." "No." Clara shook her head. "I haven't proven anything yet. This is just the beginning." By the end of the 3rd week, Clara finally completed the perfect blend. It was black tea with harmonious Darjeeling, Ceylon, and subtle jasmine notes. Elegant yet bold, traditional yet innovative. "This is it." Clara handed a teacup to Thomas. "This is our future." Thomas took a sip. His eyes widened. "Clara, this is art. The name will be Renaissance." Clara said. "Meaning rebirth. Sterling Tea's rebirth." 4 weeks later, Clara invited the department store buyer. She prepared a small tasting session and personally brewed the tea. The buyer accepted the teacup with a skeptical expression. But after taking the first sip, his expression changed. He set down the teacup and looked at Clara. "This is truly special. Thank you." Clara smiled. "Mrs. Bennett, I'm reversing my decision. Instead of reducing floor space, I'd like to expand it. Can we launch this product exclusively?" Clara's chest swelled. "Of course." Renaissance sold out in the first week after launch. Customer response was explosive. Social media overflowed with praise like, "Sterling Tea is back," and "This is the real Sterling Tea." A month later, Clara received the first quarterly report. Sales increased 25% compared to the previous quarter. More important was customer satisfaction. It reached the highest level in 5 years. At the executive meeting, the CFO smiled and said, "President, I was wrong. Your way was right. Our way." Clara corrected. "This is the result of all of us working together." But with success came an unexpected visitor. One afternoon, the secretary entered Clara's office. "President, Victoria Sterling is here to see you." Clara looked up in surprise. "Victoria Sterling?" "Yes. Will you see her?" Clara hesitated for a moment. Then nodded. "Show her in." Victoria entered the office. She looked older than Clara remembered. Her face was still elegant, but fatigue was evident in her eyes. "Will you sit?" Clara indicated the sofa. "Thank you." Victoria sat down carefully. An awkward silence flowed between the two women. Clara brewed tea and offered it to Victoria. Victoria accepted the teacup and took a sip. "It's good," Victoria said. "As expected, tea from your hands is different. What brings you here?" Clara asked cautiously. Victoria set down the teacup and looked at Clara. "I came to apologize." Victoria's voice trembled. For 20 years, I treated you wrongly. I didn't recognize your value, I ignored you, I insulted you. That was my fault. Clara was too surprised to speak. Victoria Sterling apologizing. I was obsessed with family honor. Victoria continued. Bloodline, class, such things. But now I realize, true honor doesn't come from such things. It comes from the work we do, from how we treat people. Victoria pulled out an old photograph from her handbag. It was a picture of young Victoria with her husband. My husband, Arthur's father, was a good man. He loved tea and respected craftsmanship. But after he passed away, I lost my way. I became obsessed with protecting the family and missed what was truly important. Tears welled in Victoria's eyes. Clara, you're the person I couldn't be. Strong, honest, brave. And you saved Sterling Tea. What I ruined. Clara's throat tightened. She had hated Victoria, but now she just saw a pitiful old woman. I accept your apology, Clara said quietly. And Victoria, you were strong too. In your own way. The times just changed. Victoria took Clara's hand. Please take good care of Sterling Tea. Only you can do it. I'll do my best, Clara promised. After Victoria left, Clara looked out the window for a while. Forgiveness. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. To move forward, she had to let go of the past. That night, Clara called Henry. Dad, Victoria came by today. Really? What for? To apologize. And to give her blessing. Henry was silent for a moment. Clara, did you forgive her? Yes. I forgave her. Well done. Forgiveness isn't for the other person, it's for yourself. Now you're free. Clara smiled. Free. Yes. She was now free. From past wounds, from anger, and from fear. The next day, Clara convened an all-staff meeting. Everyone, I have good news. Clara said. Our quarterly results exceeded targets by 25%. And this is thanks to the efforts of all of you. Applause erupted. Therefore, I've decided to pay all employees a special bonus. And going forward, we'll invest 10% of profits in employee welfare and education. The employees' cheers filled the conference room. We'll grow together. Clara continued. Sterling Tea is no longer just a company. We're a family. After that day, Sterling Tea completely changed. The employees' eyes changed, the atmosphere changed. They were no longer just coming to work. They came to realize their dreams. After 6 months, Sterling Tea had almost completely recovered. Stock prices rose 40% above Arthur's era, and market share continued increasing steadily. Clara was now called the tea industry's innovator, and a role model in British business by the media. But success brought new challenges. One day, Clara received an urgent video conference request from David Chen. Clara, I have good news. David smiled on the screen. A major Chinese retail chain wants an exclusive contract with Sterling Tea. The scale is 5 million units annually. Clara's breath caught. 5 million units. That was 5 times the current production volume. But there's a condition. David continued. They're requesting a price reduction. 30% discount per unit. 30%? Clara asked in surprise. Yes. And supply must start within 6 months. This is a tremendous opportunity, Clara. With this, Sterling Tea can become a global major. After the video conference ended, Clara convened an executive meeting. 5 million units. The CFO said excitedly. This is the largest contract in our history. But 30% discount. Thomas said worriedly. Then there's almost no margin left. We can make it up with volume. The CFO countered. Economy of scale. But can we maintain quality? Thomas asked. Everyone looked at Clara. Clara sat quietly, lost in thought. President, what do you think? The CFO asked. Clara slowly looked up. I'm going to decline. The conference room grew quiet. What? The CFO asked with an incredulous expression. I'm going to decline this contract. Clara said clearly. But President, this is a tens of billions of pounds opportunity. I know, Clara said. But 30% discount with 6-month supply means we'll have to compromise quality. We'll have to reduce inspection processes to speed up production. We'll have to use cheaper raw materials. That's something I'll never do. But competitors won't miss such an opportunity. Then let them do it. Clara said firmly. We'll go our way. We compete on quality. That's Sterling T's identity. The CFO looked frustrated, but Thomas seemed relieved. Clara sent a polite declination letter to David. David was disappointed but said he respected Clara's decision. But 2 weeks later, Clara heard unexpected news. That Chinese retail chain had signed a contract with competitor, Imperial Tea. And more shockingly, Imperial Tea began marketing as cheaper than Sterling Tea with the same quality. President, our market share will be affected. The marketing director reported worriedly. Imperial Tea is implementing aggressive pricing policies. What about their quality? Clara asked. Well, honestly, not bad. Not as good as Sterling Tea, but at a level that's hard for general consumers to distinguish. Clara's expression grew serious. Had she made the right decision? Had she endangered the company by trying to maintain quality? That night, Henry visited the office. Clara, I heard about your decision. Was it a wrong decision, Dad? No, Henry said firmly. You made the right decision. But Clara, the right decision isn't always the easy decision. And the results of the right decision don't always appear immediately. But market share. There's something more important than market share. Henry took Clara's hand. That's identity. What is Sterling Tea? Who are we? If the answer to that question is clear, we can overcome any crisis. 3 months passed. Imperial Tea's offensive continued, and Sterling Tea's market share actually decreased by 5%. Concerned voices began emerging at board meetings. But then, a turning point came. Famous food critic James Waters posted a long review on his blog. I've blind tested major British black tea brands over the past month. And the result was clear. Sterling Tea is still the best. Imperial Tea is cheap. But cheap and valuable are different things. A cup of Sterling Tea is an experience. It's art, care, and 100 years of tradition. Clara Bennett taking over Sterling Tea was the best thing to happen to the British tea industry. The review went viral. Hundreds of thousands read and shared it. And people began seeking out Sterling Tea again. President, orders are surging. The sales team reported excitedly. Especially the premium line Renaissance is on a 3-week waitlist. Clara smiled. Her father was right. The results of the right decision don't appear immediately, but they eventually do appear. But a bigger trial awaited. One day, Clara received an urgent call from a supplier. Mrs. Bennett, I'm sorry, but next quarter's supply will be difficult. Due to abnormal weather in India, the Darjeeling harvest has decreased by 70%. Clara's face turned pale. Darjeeling was Sterling Tea's core raw material. Without it, major products couldn't be made. Is there no alternative? We could use tea leaves from other regions, but the quality would be lower. Yes. Clara hung up and took a deep breath. This was a really serious crisis. An emergency meeting including Henry was convened. There are 3 options, the CFO said. First, substitute with tea leaves from other regions. Second, stop production and sell until inventory is exhausted. Third, drastically raise prices and sell only small quantities. The first is out, Clara said immediately. We can't compromise quality. The second means sales losses are too large. The CFO said. The third will face customer backlash. Wait, Henry interrupted. There's a fourth option. Everyone looked at Henry. I have a personal reserve. Henry said. The highest grade Darjeeling tea leaves I've collected over the past 20 years. About 5 tons. 5 tons means, Clara calculated, We can last 6 months. During that time, we can secure new suppliers. Henry said. But Dad, that's your personal collection. Now it's yours. Henry smiled. And Clara, this is exactly why I collected them. For a day like this. Tears welled in Clara's eyes. Thank you, Dad. The crisis was averted, but Clara realized. Success was more than just making good products. It was navigating endless challenges and crises. And most importantly, she wasn't alone. At the next board meeting, Clara announced a new strategy. We'll strengthen risk management. We'll diversify suppliers, increase reserve inventory, and build sustainable agriculture partnerships responding to climate change. That will be costly, the CFO pointed out. In the short term, yes. Clara acknowledged. But in the long term, it will protect us. We're building a company that will last another 100 years. 100 years of sustainability is more important than 1 year's profit. The board unanimously approved. That night, Clara stood by the office window looking at London's night view. 1 year ago, she had been working in this building's kitchen. Treated like a servant, struggling to prove her worth. Now she was this company's CEO. But more importantly, she had proven herself. Not to others, but to herself. She lifted a small teacup and took a sip. Storm brew. Tea made in the storm. Tea symbolizing her journey. Thank you, Clara murmured quietly. It wasn't clear to whom she was speaking. To her father? To herself? Or to all the experiences that had led her here? Perhaps it was to all of them. 1 year later, Sterling Tea celebrated its 101st anniversary. And a grand party was held to commemorate it. The venue was none other than the same grand ballroom. But this time, everything was different. Clara stood at the ballroom entrance wearing an elegant emerald green dress. Henry stood beside her, with Thomas and the early Honest team members next to them. They were no longer a small startup. They were Sterling Tea's core. The crystal chandeliers still sparkled brilliantly. But this time, that light reached the kitchen, the corridors, everywhere. Because Clara didn't confine employees to the kitchen. Tonight, all employees were guests. President Bennett. A reporter approached. How do you feel compared to a year ago? Clara smiled and answered. A year ago, I left this building empty-handed. But actually, I wasn't empty-handed. I had my skills, my honesty, and above all, people who believed in me. What do you think about Sterling Tea's future? It's bright, Clara said with conviction. We compete on quality, manage with honesty, and respect people. That's our secret. The party began. The string quartet played Vivaldi's Four Seasons again. But this time, the melody sounded like a victory anthem. Clara walked around the ballroom greeting guests. Customers, partners, employees. And surprisingly, some old friends were there too. Clara. A familiar voice called. Clara turned to see Margaret. She was the owner of Tea and Sympathy, Clara's first customer. Margaret. Clara hugged her. Congratulations, Clara. You did it. You were the first to believe in me. I just recognized good tea. Margaret smiled. Midway through the party, Clara took the stage and grabbed the microphone. The ballroom grew quiet. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here today. Clara said. 101 years ago, Sterling Tea began as a small tea shop. And for 100 years, this company grew, changed, and sometimes lost its way. The audience listened quietly. But today, we've returned to our roots. Quality, honesty, and respect for people. These are Sterling Tea's true values. Clara paused and looked around the ballroom. 2 years ago, I left this building. At that time, I felt like a failure. But now I realize, that wasn't failure, it was a beginning. Sometimes you have to leave to truly return. Applause erupted. And today, I have a special announcement to make. Clara continued. Sterling Tea is establishing a new foundation. The Clara Bennett Scholarship Foundation. This foundation will support young people passionate about the tea industry regardless of background. Because I believe, talent doesn't come from bloodline or class, but from passion and effort. Louder applause rang out. As the party was ending, Clara briefly stepped out to the balcony alone. The Thames sparkled in the moonlight. She took a deep breath. Clara. Henry came out to the balcony. Dad, what were you thinking about? Just reflecting on the past 2 years. So much has happened. Indeed. Henry leaned on the railing. Clara, are you proud? Yes. Clara answered honestly. For the first time, I'm truly proud. Of myself. That's enough. Henry patted his daughter's shoulder. Success isn't others' recognition, it's reconciliation with yourself. They silently looked at the night view for a while. Dad, thank you. For everything. I only gave you weapons. Henry said. You were the one who fought. Then Thomas came out to the balcony. Clara, it's time for the photo. With all the employees. Clara nodded and went back inside. Over 200 employees were gathered in the ballroom. They were all smiling. Clara stood among them, not as president but as a member of the team. Camera flashes went off. That moment was recorded forever. 3 months later, a small rental apartment. Arthur sat on the sofa watching television. Clara was being interviewed on screen. Mrs. Bennett, Sterling Tea has been selected as Company of the Year. How do you feel? It's an honor. But this isn't my achievement alone, it's thanks to all our employees' dedication. Arthur turned off the television. He looked out the window. Through the small apartment window, only gray buildings were visible. He once lived in a grand mansion. Now he lived in a studio apartment. This is all your fault. Victoria's voice came from the next room. If you had treated Clara properly. You were the same, Mother. Arthur shouted back. The sound of their arguing continued. They lived blaming each other, regretting the past, and cursing the present. Arthur sat on the sofa and dropped his head. He had lost everything. The company, honor, family, and pride. But the biggest loss was opportunity. The opportunity to do things right. He pulled out an old photograph from the drawer. It was a wedding photo with Clara from 20 years ago. Clara in that photo looked happy. And he himself was young and full of hope. I'm sorry, Clara, Arthur muttered, looking at the photo. But that apology was too late. And no one heard it. At the same time, in the Cotswolds, Henry's farm was bathed in sunset. Clara was walking through the garden with her father. The scent of lavender filled the air. Dad, shall we have tea here? Good. They sat at a small table in the middle of the garden. Clara poured tea from a thermos she had brought. Morning bloom. Still perfect. Henry said, taking a sip. I did it the way you taught me, Dad. I only taught the technique. Henry said. The heart was yours. The sun was setting. Golden light spread across the fields. Dad, are you happy? Clara asked. Yes. Henry nodded. Are you? Yes. Clara smiled. Really? They drank tea in silence. They no longer had anything to prove or fight for. They just needed to enjoy this moment, this peace, this cup of tea. When the sun had completely set and stars began appearing one by one, Clara realized. True nobility doesn't come from bloodline but from one's attitude toward their work. And true success isn't others' recognition but being able to look confidently at yourself in the mirror. Clara lifted her teacup and held it up to the starlight. The tea glowed amber. It was beautiful. And honest. Just like her. Cheers, Clara said. To what? Henry asked. To new beginnings. And to the journey that never ends. They clinked their teacups. A clear sound crossed the night air. And that sound seemed like a blessing, like a promise, and like the bell of victory. Thank you for watching Clara's incredible journey from the kitchen to the CEO's office. Her story reminds us that true success isn't measured by titles or wealth, but by staying true to our values and never giving up on what we believe in. If this story inspired you, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more empowering tales of courage and transformation. Remember, you are not defined by how others see you, but by how you see yourself. Until next time, keep brewing your own success.